Today we find ourselves in Newark, New Jersey for a cautionary tale of sickening obsession that's never been discussed. A story that highlights the red flags to look out for when trying to break away from an unhealthy relationship. It also highlights the responsibilities that we have when trying to navigate a situation like this, if ever in it, because things could quickly unravel and escalate before you know it. Now, I expect that there will be many opinions when it comes to certain decisions made in today's story, but I urge everyone to keep in mind that when it comes to dealing with someone on the brink of madness, logic is the last thing that you should ever expect. A quick side note before we get started. A lot of the people who watch the videos on this channel are not subscribed. Now, if you're just passing through, that's perfectly okay and I appreciate you either way. But if you respect the content on this channel and want to keep up to date and see more, please feel free to hit like, subscribe, and enable notifications so you don't miss anything going forward. With that being said, today's video is going to contain details that can be very hard to make it through for some. So before going in, please do keep that in mind. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Our other big story tonight, a father wanted custody of his one-year-old child, but that quest exploded in blood and tragedy on the streets of Newark. Police say that at least 3 people are dead in a desperate rampage, and the search is on for the killer.
2 people are dead. 1 person is on life support and expected not to make it. The father actually did have custody of the 3-year-old who was in the middle of this shooting rampage today, and we'll explain more on that in just a second. Police here in Newark and New York are looking for a man, the suspect whose name is Jose Luis Baroa. They expect that he jumped on 280, which is right near the scene, jumped on 280 and headed back to New York.
Before he take the taxi, he said the little boy is dead. I'm gonna kill the boy. Everybody hear this down here.
Newark, New Jersey has a population of over 310,000 people, making it Jersey's largest city by population, home to many families of diverse backgrounds. Given its close proximity, you'll find people who make their way from Newark into New York for a multitude of reasons, whether it be for business, visiting loved ones, or just to experience the city. It makes for an easy commute by car or subway, just about 30 or 40 minutes of a trip. A lot of New Yorkers make the trip into Newark too, thousands who commute there on a daily basis. It's a city known for having a rich history, even known as a destination for modern artists in the early 1900s and onward. Much of what makes Newark such a unique city has been well documented for years, and it still maintains its reputation till this day. By the mid-90s, after decades of a rising crime rate, the city would see a spike in violent crimes, leading to parts of Newark being in the headlines just as often as some of the 5 boroughs over here in New York. Activities like drug dealing and rivalries among different groups dealing would result in violent wars, with shootings at all times of the day, unfortunately, becoming commonplace. It was all part of a bigger problem plaguing not only New Jersey and New York City, but a lot of places in the country. In the year 1994, there were said to be 96 murders that took place in Newark, New Jersey. Now, those are the numbers reported by Newark police, who would probably know better than anyone. But there were 3 in particular that took place in May of that year that would leave numerous families affected, and they would all take place within minutes of each other. A horrific event that would leave the entire city shaken. When it came to the area surrounding North 5th Street in Newark, New Jersey's North Ward, it wasn't the safest and came with its set of challenges, but it was also somewhere with a strong community. For many, Newark was where they lived all their lives, the only home they'd ever known. Residents mostly considered the neighborhood dangerous due to the drug dealers, who according to them, mostly came from other parts of New Jersey. They said it was them who started the trouble. It made for some tense moments between residents and the drug dealers as they came and went on a daily basis. But regardless, this was home. One of the many families who resided in the area was that of a woman named Wilda Enriquez and her 2 brothers, 29-year-old Jose DeJesus and 31-year-old Israel DeJesus. Wilda lived in Queens, but having brothers and parents who lived in Newark, she often made the trip to visit. They were well known in the neighborhood, although they kept to themselves. Brothers Jose and Israel were described as good people, always friendly to everyone and very hardworking. Good sons who were loyal to their parents and the rest of their family. Younger brother Jose lived with his parents, niece, and nephew, holding a job as a mechanic. Older brother Israel was described as the shy one of the 2. It lived on South Street. He also held a job as a mechanic, working hard to support his wife and their 2 young sons. The brothers were always known to come to their parents' aid whenever necessary, providing a helping hand daily. If they weren't doing that, then they were working or spending time with relatives, doing everything from going fishing at Branch Brook Park to going to wrestling events together. They were always seen as good, quiet people who would often be seen outside just running errands or cleaning their car. They always said hello and treated neighbors with the same respect that they were given. They never caused any problems for anyone. Now, while the family was never known to have any issues with neighbors or anyone for that matter, when it came to Sister Rowilda, there were serious issues in her personal life that were starting to become too much to bear, and they all revolved around the relationship with the father of her child, a 35-year-old man by the name of Jose Luis Baroa. Originally from Cuba, Baroa arrived in Florida during the 1980 Mariel boat lift. When he arrived in New York City later on, he resided in Brooklyn, New York, and moved around a bit after. The couple had history together going back to around 1991, but by the beginning of 1994, their relationship had already gone through a lot of changes, and not in a positive way. By this point, their son was just 3 years old. While they had the responsibility of caring for a young child together, the truth was, the relationship was starting to suffer. According to reports, Baroa and Rowilda lived together in Jackson Heights, Queens before their breakup. That's until he laid his hands on her, hitting her during an argument. Other violent moments in his past were already on record. He had once been arrested in Newark and would end up doing 6 months in prison. This was after he was said to have beaten a man unconscious in a barroom brawl. The man was handcuffed while Baroa attacked him. One report stated that Baroa also discovered Rowilda was still legally married to someone else, although it wasn't referenced again in any other reports. Either way, it would all result in Baroa moving out following an ugly breakup. Everything changed from here on out, and the child was in the middle of it all. After the breakup, Baroa was homeless on the street, and he was with his son. This was after he had apparently received a letter from Rowilda where she told Baroa that he could keep their child. Being that Baroa was on the street, he set up a P.O. box where he would be able to receive documents and letters. With this letter being received, it was clear that the tumultuous relationship had reached a point of no return, and her family was aware of it. Baroa spent most of the winter from 1993 into 1994 sleeping in parks and train stations all over New York City, and his son was with him most of those times, all during blistering cold temperatures. No condition for anyone to be living in, especially a 3-year-old. They would spend days at a time on the street, carrying 2 or 3 bags with them containing personal items, mostly belonging to the child. Items like baby clothes, sneakers, and 1 or 2 toys. Baroa had no family in New York City that could help him out of this situation. That's when he sought the help and guidance of a woman named Emma, who he had known for more than a decade. It was she who helped him adjust to life in the States way back when he arrived in the 80s. Seeing how bad it had gotten, Emma offered a helping hand and allowed Baroa and his son to stay with her at her apartment in Washington Heights. She felt bad for Baroa, of course, but mostly felt for his child. She didn't want them to have to keep living on the street. It gave Baroa a chance to find work and get his life back in order. It was stated that he was looking for stability and to devote his time to church, but he also had a strong and unhealthy focus on his ex-girlfriend, one that seemed to start the very moment they broke up. It was starting to become a real problem. He brought her up all the time, often asking why she left him and why she didn't want to be a mother to their child. He would say things like, "I've got to find her, and why does she do that to me?" It was clear to those who knew him that he didn't take the breakup lightly, and he was only becoming more and more fixated on her. After a few months, he would end up landing a job at the Bergen Bindery, located at 809 Bergen Street in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. He was being paid $7.50 an hour, almost double the minimum wage at the time in New York. Co-workers grew used to hearing Baroa speak of his son, and he even brought him to the job a few times. They would see him feeding the child and changing his diaper while working his shift. While finding work and having a warm place to stay was a huge improvement over life on the streets, it would all be short-lived. In the first week of May of 1994, he would get fired from the job for what a former boss called slacking off. It would leave Baroa with no way of supporting himself or his child. It sent him into a downward spiral. Associates of his stated that he became almost despondent, inconsolable as he struggled with the idea of possibly being back on the street. He didn't want it for himself or his son. He had also started to receive more letters from his ex, who was now said to be with someone else after their breakup. These letters were very different from before. While she had first stated that he could keep their son, she was now saying that she was going to go to court and wanted to start the process of getting custody of the child. She wanted to raise him with the man she was now in a relationship with. it would become even more of a fixation for Baroa. It was more than his son or losing his job. This obsession with his ex had become everything. All he could discuss or think about was her and whatever she was doing. And on Monday, May 9th of 1994, that obsession would lead to a bloody rampage on the streets of Newark. It was that evening that Baroa placed a call to Awilda's parents, the grandparents of his child. He let them know he would be visiting their home in Newark. It was said that his reason for going there was to discuss giving his son back to Awilda since he could no longer care for him, although his true motives would soon be obvious. He made his way to Newark with his son at his side and a co-worker who dropped him off. They arrived at the home of Awilda's family at around 6:30 p.m. When he arrived at the location, he would come to find Awilda's brothers, Jose and Israel, sitting on the front porch, listening to salsa, something they often did after a long day at work. Baroa would begin screaming at the brothers, accusing their sister of having cheated and saying that she was a bad mother. Her brother Jose responded that whatever his sister did relationship-wise wasn't his concern. The brothers were well aware of his previous behavior toward their sister and didn't feel they owed him any type of courtesy. It was stated that they laughed at Baroa, mocking him because she had found another boyfriend, someone who treated her better. Within seconds of the confrontation, the situation would go from arguing to Baroa doing the unthinkable. While holding his son under his arm, he pulled out a 9mm. He took it out of the same bag that he kept his kids' clothes in. He pointed it straight at Jose. Seeing the firearm, Jose's reaction was to stand up, but in an instant, Baroa fired, striking him 4 times in the chest and 2 times in the back. Jose's brother Israel tried to intervene and protect him, but Baroa would end up firing on him as well, hitting him twice in the head and once in each of his legs. Baroa's son would become loose of his grasp and tried to take cover behind a mailbox, but he was quickly grabbed by Baroa and dragged through the street, right back in his father's grasp. A cousin of the brothers happened to be heading over to the home and spoke to Israel just moments before it all unfolded. He would make it there just minutes after, finding his cousins motionless on the ground. Baroa's threats and erratic behavior had now exploded into cold-blooded murder, and he wasn't done. He held his son tucked under his arm throughout the entire shooting as his child tried to break away. He cried in sheer fright, powerless in his father's arms. Baroa ran off with him, firearm at his side, making it a few blocks before reaching North 4th Street. It was here that he crossed paths with his next victim, 59-year-old Arline Joe. Arline was originally from South Carolina, raised on a cotton farm throughout the 30s and 40s. Her favorite expression? It didn't take but a minute of time. Arline was well known in the neighborhood, mostly for always being helpful, having a huge heart, and adoring children. She and her husband devoted much of their time to parenting, working with agencies to adopt 12 kids. Arlene's adopted children range from ages 14 to 25 years old, with 6 still living with she and her husband, and the other 6 already having moved out on their own. They also briefly adopted 3 children from Jersey City whose mother was battling the AIDS virus. She could always be seen walking through the area taking her younger kids to school, even if the Alma Flag School on 7th Avenue where they attended was close to home. If there was ever anything any family or neighbors needed, if it was within her power, she was always there to lend a helping hand. She was considered a positive force in her community and always thought of others before herself. When she crossed paths with Baroa, she was parking her Cadillac in a fenced lot across the street from her home. Most in the area parked their cars at that same lot to avoid being broken into, but at the very moment that she went to move that car, Baroa had reached the same spot. He approached the vehicle, opening the door and grabbing Arline. He would begin to pull on her, demanding that she get out of the vehicle. When he saw that she wasn't moving fast enough, he dragged her out of the car by force and pulled out his weapon again. He held it up to her as she said her last words. "Oh no, don't do that." He then fired, striking her several times in the chest. Baroa threw his son in the car, got behind the wheel, and sped off, leaving Arline on the sidewalk as she bled out. Her husband was just a few blocks away and heard those shots, completely unaware that it involved her. As he walked home, he'd come to find Arline lying on the ground critically wounded, and she wasn't breathing. At first, he thought maybe she had suffered an asthma attack, but within moments, he knew it was far worse. By the time he got to her, Arline was already gone. Her life ended instantly. Baroa had now claimed 3 lives within a matter of minutes on the streets of Newark, New Jersey, and he was now on his way to New York City. Just moments after Baroa took 3 lives in cold blood, a Newark police officer makes an eerie prediction on how he thinks the rampage will end.
This guy, he's gonna be found like this, because he's gonna do himself. That's how they usually do it. That's what he's gonna do. He's in Washington Heights someplace. He's probably over in New York.
A father wanted custody of his 1-year-old child, but that quest exploded in blood and tragedy on the streets of Newark. Police say that at least 3 people are dead in a desperate rampage, and the search is on for the killer. Jim Dolan is live right now at the scene. Jim?
Diane, as often happens in a case like this, the facts are still developing here. So let me just make a couple of quick comments. First of all, 2 people are dead. 1 person is on life support and expected not to make it. The father actually did have custody of the 3-year-old child who was in the middle of this shooting rampage today, and we'll explain more on that in just a second. Police here in Newark and New York are looking for a man who, with witnesses watching and his own 3-year-old child looking on, shot his ex-girlfriend's 2 brothers, and then, this is all according to police now, shot and killed a total stranger who, according to police, his car he stole. You are looking at video of the scene shortly after the shooting this evening. There were a number of witnesses. The first 2 shootings, the shootings of the 2 brothers, happened right there in the street in front of the ex-girlfriend's house. You see the homicide investigators there. 2 of the brothers are on life support again, and the one woman whose car the person allegedly stole, the suspect whose name is Jose Luis Baroa, he is the suspect, 31 years old, of Brooklyn. The woman whose car he stole has been killed, and police are now looking for him. Police issued an all-points bulletin for him. They expect that he jumped on 280, which is right near the scene, jumped on 280 and headed back to New York. Reporting live from from Newark, Jim Dolan, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
By 4 a.m. the next morning, just hours after the carnage unfolded, there was a huge coordinated effort between Newark Police and NYPD, since they now believed that he was headed to New York City. They knew he still had his son, and that he was extremely dangerous and unpredictable. After interviews with friends and relatives close to the situation, Newark police now knew exactly what they were dealing with. A deranged person fueled by their obsession, and he was capable of anything. Those who knew Baroa and learned of his violent spree provided details of places that he had stayed in the past. This included the apartment of Emma, who he had stayed with, and who would often babysit his son while he worked. It gave authorities somewhere to shift their focus. They were able to visit locations he previously lived and were on his trail, but they kept missing him. At this point, the entire tri-state area was alerted about the incident and what to look out for, and the focus of the search now centered on one specific building in Manhattan, 2153 Amsterdam Ave, located on 166th Street in Washington Heights. This was where authorities believed Baroa was headed. The area, much like today, was bustling with activity, a thriving neighborhood full of mom-and-pop businesses, and residents here would soon find themselves at the center of a state-to-state manhunt. Authorities would send plainclothes detectives to Emma's apartment building to keep an eye out for Baroa in case he showed up. And a little while later, he did, except he went undetected. At around 8:30 a.m., Baroa knocked on Emma's door frantically, and he had his son with him. He was asking to be let in. She refused. She had seen the news of the slayings in Jersey and heard it all over the radio. She knew he was on the run. She told him he should turn himself in. She feared he would take her life next. There was no way she could let him in and feel safe. Emma told him to leave his son by the door and leave. She tried to do what she could for the child, but the suggestion would only make Baroa furious. He responded by yelling that he was going to take the child's life next, because nobody was going to take his son away from him. He said the child's life would soon be over. Emma and her daughter desperately pleaded with him to not harm his son. In his heightened state of panic and madness, it seems it finally dawned on Baroa that police were likely looking for him. He just had no way of being sure how close they were. Detectives who were said to be watching the building somehow never noticed when he arrived. He took his son and quickly left the area, again undetected. Baroa held a cab and took it downtown, and at around 10:30 a.m., he placed one of 2 phone calls to Emma's apartment from a payphone. It was here that he confessed to taking 3 lives in Jersey, and he told Emma why he did it, mentioning that the brothers made fun of him and laughed at him. But when it came to Arline, she was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. He spoke coherently at first, but then he began to ramble in an almost hysterical state, the reality of his monstrous actions likely starting to really set in. He spoke a mix of English and Spanish, saying that he didn't feel sorry about taking Jose and Israel's lives, but he did feel bad about taking Arlene's. He stated he demanded that she got out of the vehicle, and she refused, so he did what he had to do. He needed a car, and this was the cost. As he made threats of ending it all and taking his son with him, a detective who was in Emma's apartment grabbed the phone and tried to persuade Baroa to give himself up. For a moment, it sounded like it was working. He said he would give himself up, but he didn't want to go back to New Jersey because he was scared of getting the electric chair. He said he wanted police to leave her apartment and stop chasing him, and then he would surrender. But before giving any clue as to where he and his son were, he hung up. By this point, Baroa's ex Awilda was dealing with the sudden shock of losing her brothers, and now she was completely uncertain of her child's fate. About a half hour later, at 11 a.m., Baroa would return to Emma's apartment. Many wouldn't have stepped foot back there knowing that there were police anywhere near the building, but it was clear that by now, he was far beyond the point of no return and lost his grip on reality in general. There was no coming back from the terrible acts that he had committed, and of course, authorities were still close. They were now inside of Emma's apartment, in nearby apartments, and in the staircase above. He still felt that authorities were near, but despite his suspicions, he knocked on Emma's door. When she answered, she again urged him to leave the child and turn himself in. She asked if he was still armed, to which Baroa replied by asking if she was scared. "No, I'm not scared," she replied. "Oh, then you have a policeman with you," he said. Within moments of knocking on the door, he backed away toward the staircase, walking between the first and second floors. He then held his weapon up to his own son's head and fired. The shots rang out through the building and out into the street, sending residents ducking for cover. As his young son lied on the ground, bleeding out, he would hold the weapon up to his own temple and fire one last time. It was over. A rampage fueled by pure anger and obsession finally reached its horrifying end. Authorities raced out from the apartments and staircase to find Baroa lifeless and his infant child right at his side. His firearm was next to him, with a shell still jammed inside. An officer lifted the child to find him bleeding from his face. The bullet went through one cheek and came out the other. He was still alive. He was rushed to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where he was listed as in critical but stable condition. He would survive the attack. The aftermath of Baroa's rampage will leave communities in both Newark and Washington Heights completely stunned. Crowds of people gathered on 166 where it all ended. They witnessed the final moments of a horrifying ordeal that took 16 hours to finally end. They had seen and heard all about the manhunt on the news and heard it on the radio. They never imagined it would lead here, of all places. It was the same back in Jersey. Residents that lived around both the DeJesuses and Arline expressed complete disbelief. It just hit very close to home. Witnesses to all three slayings in Jersey gave their accounts of what they saw. It was a relief that this violent spree had finally ended. For the families involved and directly affected, however, they were only getting started pushing through the grief. For them, it was nowhere near over. On Monday, May 16th of 1994, a service was held for Arline Joe at Murray's Temple of Service, located in Jersey City. Many attended the service to pay respects to the woman they always knew to be full of love and who gave back to her community constantly. No matter the good or the bad, her heart was always in the right place. Those in attendance could say nothing but positive things about Arlene's character. It was clear that this was a huge loss, and she would be deeply missed. Her body was later taken to Rose Hill Cemetery in Linden, New Jersey, for burial. A service for brothers Jose and Israel was held at Iglesia Faro de Luz in Newark. Many would attend, sharing memories and remembering the brothers that they knew as hard-working family men. Their sister Awilda sobbed quietly, still very much in shock and heartbroken. It was surprising to anyone who knew the family. They never imagined that they would be dealing with such a tragedy. While Baroa said that these men laughed at him and mocked him, many felt that this was just a way to justify what he had done. There's no guarantee that they would have been safe had they acted any differently. That's if it's true that they did indeed mock him. He went to that house armed for a reason. His threats and obsessive fixation made his intentions clear. When he couldn't get to their sister, he took his anger out on them. If what he said was true, he took 2 lives over just a few words, and a 3rd life for no reason at all. It was clear that he was just a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. He was a monster, on a mission to make others suffer, and he didn't care who got in the way. Jose and Israel were laid to rest at Clinton Cemetery in Irvington, New Jersey. What unfolded in Newark and New York City in May of 1994 would leave numerous families deeply torn forever. Families forced to say goodbye to their loved ones far too soon. And all because of one individual, one monster's descent into madness, an obsession that led him down a dark path of self-destruction, bringing others into that darkness with him. But he wouldn't face the consequences of his heartless actions. Unable to face the lives that he had ruined, he sealed his own fate and left a world of pain behind him. If alive today, Jose would be 60, Israel would be 62, and Arline would be 90 years old. Rest in peace, Jose DeJesus, Israel DeJesus, and Arline Joe. My deepest condolences go out to all the families affected by this senseless tragedy. You aren't forgotten.